Thank you. So I have the job of going through all the numbers, so please excuse me if I mess up. I hope I'm not going to. We've got 5 different categories of all of the ones that we do have covered in being shown to you today, and then everything is in the book, so if I do get it wrong, you can read it properly in the book. We've checked that's right. So what did we do? We are using data which is about media spend as our core data source to say what is actually happening out there, because we have a situation in the UK that Nielsen, which is our ad dynamics, which is our major data source, A, has never covered search, B, now covers online display a lot better than it did, but it was really bad before. But then within that online display, one thing it doesn't cover at all is any social media, so any Facebook data, which is huge for some of our brands and categories. And so we turned to SMI data, which isn't perfect either, but it's a pool data system. In the UK, it's covering about 65% of UK media agency billings. It's all above the line media, so it has online display, and you can drill down into that. This is how we get to the digital news brands, digital print element, but it also covers paid search by those agencies. So the paid search, because some paid search is done by brands themselves and others by very small independents, is going to be less well covered, but it's still a representative sample. So when we talk about percentage of media spend, we're talking about a true percentage of media spend rather than just of traditional media spend plus a little bit of digital. So that's a really big advancement, and we can do that and look at trend information over now something like 7 years, which is really useful. So then we can look at how that display spend and is breaking down. The digital spend is breaking into display versus video. There's a small issue there that Facebook put all their data into display, even though more than half of it is video, but I'm trying to talk to them nicely about that. And then we can break down the news brand spend into digital print is covered in that. So we've got news brand traditional spend, and then also the digital spend. So we can look at those and look at those for individual categories which SMI provides. So when we're calculating what we call total ad spend, we're using a combination of Nielsen data for the offline media spend, and then we're using the SMI data and what percentage it says digital is as a proportion of all of the total data to be able to work out a calculated uplift to Nielsen for categories. Now, obviously, for all of the brands that we work with at OMG, we know what the actual proportions are, but this is to do this across broad categories, so we've got the averages across all categories. So it's a simple calculation to do. You just got to wait for the different data sets to come in and match up the categories and such like, and we've become quite expert at doing this. So we then, that is one of our key data sources. The next data source is to build off all of the econometric models that have been built at Omnicom Media Group. Analytic Marketing Sciences now was Brand Science, building a whole set of data of individual cases where we were building a recipe for how sales are worked. This is what I would call the cake slide, and until Wednesday I had a cake on it, but now we've got much more professional, and we're talking just about the different sorts of things that would go into an econometric model, a market mix model. So yeah, advertising is in there, but there's lots of other stuff, all the contextual stuff, all of the pricing and distribution and availability stuff, which is going to have much bigger effect than the media stuff, but then the media is much more controllable. So this is the point that you can build an individual model, and you can look at the impacts of all of these and look at how the ROIs that you get out for your media by channel are then reported, and that forms a line in our database which we call the results vault. So what we've done is build a meta-analysis of those models that we have in the results vault, and because of the super category work that I'm going to come on to in a moment, we can look at over 680 econometric models to do this. We're looking at relatively recent time, 2011 to 2017. We've been building this database since 2001, but we're looking at recent time, so we're looking at a real picture of how digital is working. Where the database reports revenue return on investment, but we also code each of our brands by what its profit margin is. If our clients don't tell us what it is, we kind of know when you look it up on the internet, and it varies hugely by category. So in, say, luxury goods, there's a profit margin of something like 70%, which is why when you go to Bicester Outlet Shopping Mall, then you'll find things 70% off because they're just selling them on at cost. If you're working in retail, grocery, maybe you've only got a 5% profit margin if you're a real discounter. Maybe if you're a more luxury one, you've got a higher profit margin. So it really does make a difference when you look at PROI, and it does mean that once you get down to PROI rather than RROI, you can start to aggregate data between different categories that might have different profit margins, and the numbers are meaningful rather than not being meaningful, more representative of the margin changing than the ROIs changing. Simple. So what we do is that when we're looking at our data, we are looking at each of these data points, for instance, in a category, and we are looking at the profit return on investment that we've recorded for the campaign in the year for that brand, and then we'll look at it versus another metric, and we're looking here at print news brands as a percentage of total media spend. And we look at those dots and we can see, yeah, there's a relationship there. It's a slightly non-intuitive relationship. Why is it kicking up at the end? But okay, we'll look at that later. But essentially what we are saying is that this is the real data that we have got. Each of those represents a real data points. We know they've been calculated in terms of the effectiveness measures using a very similar methodology. And so the data is comparable. What we do then is to move into looking at tertiles. So what we are trying to do is to create a group of 3 groups, terts, as I call them. I'm sure that's not the official name, but no one's told me what it is. So I'm calling them terts. And so what we are then doing is just taking those cases and we are looking at what the average PROI is for each of those. Each of the terts has got equal number of brands in, and if you've got an odd number of brands, then you divide it up sensibly, and then we just report the average of that. And so what we have is a set of data which is not completely perfect, but it is a really good representation of a data set. And again, because of the beauty of our super categories work, we have large numbers of data in our data sets, and we have also gone through a process of taking out outliers who might have been not kind of representative of what brands would spend. So for instance, if we're looking at percentage of total media spend, we might have a very high percentage for print, but actually that media spend was really small, and so it's not fair to give that equal weight with another brand in there. So we've gone through quite a lot of cleaning exercises to get to this data, so it's as representative as possible. Once we've got all of our data across our different brands, then actually what we are doing is to create a set of response curves. So in my life, I know that TV is always purple and cinema is always orange, but here we've got shades of blue. What you do when you're trying to optimize to a certain level of media investment over the x-axis is you put it into an optimization system, but actually I can optimize in my head now, and I'm just looking for the highest and the slopiest one, which happens to be print news brands on this example chart. And so what we can see is that other elements like TV at the top, you can see a flattening of response as we spend more. And what would happen is that the marginal ROI rather than the average ROI would be declining down to 0, whereas our other ones, such as print news brands, would be increasing its marginal ROI. And what we do is we run lots of different scenarios very quickly to find the scenario that maximizes the marginal ROI, and it's always the same for each of the brands. So you're picking the point at which each of the brands is starting to kick over to that best marginal ROI. So that's what we do, and from that you can then say, well, this is what the proportion of print should be. And we're going to show you that data. We're not going to show you the individual response curves for individual categories. That's kind of Omnicom special knowledge. But you've got the print percentages coming up in the different sections. So the super categories. Now here, this is where I might mess up, because these got called different categories, and now they've got these lovely snazzy names. I'm very grateful for Newsworks on working, because we're going to pick these up as a result of this. We were calling them much more kind of tactical names like cheap and cheerful FMCG and such like, and now that's called something else. So we have 30 categories, which would range from gambling and lotteries to confectionery, automotive through to travel and transport must be the last one. They're all very functional categories that you would get on a Nielsen report or an SMI report, because we need to be able to pick up the data that way. But what we've been able to do is to look at those categories and say, how are those categories similar or different to each other? So there are 5 different segments in total, and then what we are being able to see is that those segments might vary because of the frequency of purchase, the consideration of brands for purchasing in a category, also the media, typical media mix, and also very importantly the typical effectiveness that comes out from that media mix, which will be a combination of ROIs but also the ad stocks, the carryover effects of those. So we did a really interesting clustering project which threw up these 5 different segments. Which are these? So everyday pickups, refresh and revive, leisure and pleasure, shiny new things, which we keep thinking of shinny new things as a result of a typo that we were putting into our system at one stage, and then grown-up stuff, which isn't as exciting as it looks. It's kind of grown-up chore stuff in some ways. So the first 3 are all dominated by frequent purchase. So FMCG will be particularly in the first 2 different sections, everyday pickups and refresh and revive. Everyday pickups is going to be a little bit more cheap and cheerful, regular stuff and so on. And then the refresh and revive will have more health and beauty, interesting. I think our first name for it was interesting FMCG. Maybe we shouldn't have those things. Leisure and pleasure is another frequent purchase. So this is about people entertainment, but also gambling goes in there as a different category. And interestingly, retail grocery fits into that one. I quite like my shop at Waitrose, I have to say. And I then go down the road to Lidl and I pick up my avocados for half the price. But yeah. Arguably, one of the things about all of these categories is that there's blurring now. So retail grocery could equally fit into online services now for the kind of online regular purchases that you do. Gambling and lotteries, well, scratch cards could be called FMCG, whereas the gambling might be something else. All really interesting blurs. And we think that working on these sorts of categories, which are talking about more the types of purchases that they are, and then hopefully we'll look at the types of consumers that there are and then the mind states that there are, is a really interesting progression, because if you can cover everything, you can say, okay, I work in funerals, where should I go? I can tell you it's not everyday pickups or refresh and revive. I think it's probably grown-up stuff. But we can work out a way to get it put into a different category. So these 5 different categories are the things that mean that we can use more of our models to populate the data. We've got bigger samples, and then it also means that when you've got a question about your category, if it's not covered by some of the big categories, and we've got big category data for you too, updated, then you'll be able to find an answer for your brand. So we're going to look at some of these categories. I'm going to do everyday pickups in some depth, and then we might go a little bit faster as we go through the other ones. So this is covering low-cost items, typically FMCG products, impulse treats, crisps, confectionery. Our traditional category of media fits into this, which when it was built, it was kind of lots of magazines and things like that. But now, obviously, you've got some media goes into services and such like. But yeah, absolutely, magazines and newspapers that you would buy or get free in Waitrose would be in here. So typically, you would buy these quite often just just on impulse. You wouldn't spend a lot of time looking at that display and say, okay, I'm going to have a crunchy this time. You'd have a portfolio that you'd go with, wouldn't you, that you're familiar with. So it's less driven by, you're not going to be spending lots of time researching your brand, which is what might happen in some of your other categories and such like. So this is very FMCG oriented. So newsbrands' share of total everyday pickups media spend has always been low. So back in 2013 at 5%, it's now at 3.5%. So the drop versus other categories is less pronounced. What you can see is that the amount of digital print hasn't really changed that much in that, which is odd, really, I think. So the digital print element is there, but it's a significant element relative to the actual spend on newsbrands. So you could imagine building an individual, if this was an average brand, building a market mix model of this to be able to pick up an individual channel that's only 0.6%. It would be really difficult for a market mix modeler. It's got to be at least 1%, maybe more, and it's got to run in different campaign bursts, which is another issue with digital. Sometimes it's on a bit too often and regularly. You can't pick up a pattern from it. So this is why we've worked out this different approach to be able to look at how digital print works. So coming straight out of our database, once we've coded our data into which of the super categories we have, we get the print newsbrands tertiles. So this is looking at the campaign profit ROI versus low, medium and high terts for everyday pickups. So the percentages of print newsbrand spend is going to vary according to your category. And what we can see is that the campaign P ROI for the lowest tertile, which is where we currently are just, is at 0.12. This is the world of FMCG, where revenue ROIs are always less than 1 and profit ROIs are always much less than 1. Obviously, when you're talking about a market mix model and you are talking about influencing sales, you're influencing a sale. So if you could get someone to buy that product 20 more times, then you could, in theory, multiply your ROI up by 20. It doesn't quite work like that, but there is a longer term effect, which is a bit about the frequency of purchase within a category. So yes, we've got a very low ROI for our low tertile, which is where we currently sit. And immediately when we see more print newsbrand spend, we can see an improvement in ROI. And as we move to really high print newsbrand spend for FMCG, it goes down. I like these studies which are realistic. It doesn't keep saying you've got to spend loads more and loads more print is going to work. This is saying stick within 3 to 17% for your print newsbrands, and that's your optimal space. Don't really go higher, but even going higher is better than going lower. From the response curves that we build for this category, we can see that if you are spending a very low amount on your brand, less than £5 million, we're saying 8% for print newsbrands. If you are spending any more, we're saying 7%. So this is the recommended spend at different levels, and it takes into account all of the other media response curves. Now on to the digital ones. So now what we are looking at is campaign P ROI versus digital newsbrand usage. Then what we're seeing here is, again, what we've gone through is now coded our individual data sets in the database. So every single line of those 684, Marie, Emily and Patrick have gone in and found what the percentage of digital newsbrand spend was for that campaign. By accessing the data from the SMI data that we have access to. And now we're looking at that as a split. So we're looking at the digital newsbrand print spend, low as 0.1 to 0.3, high as 0.7 to 2.1, and then medium 0.3 to 0.6. What this is saying is that there's not huge amounts of difference here, but there is a benefit here to being up at the higher end. It's not large as we see with some other elements. So we are suggesting that 0.7 to 2.1 would have a proven impact. It's not going to be with the highest profit differentiator. So perhaps you don't want to steal Denise's thunder, but you can see that by moving from one sector to another sector, you're not going to get a huge amount of benefit in terms of PROI. But you are going to get a benefit. We'll take anything, won't we? So everyday pickups, then we're recommending a minimum investment in newsbrands of 7% for print and 1.4% for digital, and that's all based on the tertile analysis, the response analysis of campaign PROI. Okay, we're going to move on to grown-up stuff now, over here. And this is that category our fifth category, which is infrequent or contract purchase. So it's kind of the fundamentals of what we need to buy in life. I wouldn't call it fun stuff. That falls into kind of shiny new things. It is train tickets. It will be your electricity provider, your telco provider. It will be online deliveries and such like. It's a big category of different things that you kind of just, that's what you do now. A lot of it is moving online in terms of how you transact this stuff. And it is particularly interesting to look at. And it's a huge segment in terms of the spend that there is behind it, which will be covered by Denise and is in the report. So when we look at the grown-up stuff, what we're seeing is the trends in terms of spend from 2013 down to 2017, huge drop-offs in the traditional print news brands, so less than half what it was in 2013. The digital news brands has decreased too. It's kind of rallied in 2016, but 2017 has seen it come down too. So whilst that is a nice healthy number, it has not grown as the print news brands has declined. When we look at campaign profit ROI versus print news brand usage, again the tertiles are there. Low is 0.3 to 6.2. The high is 17.8 to 48.0. There are some brands in this category who are spending lots of money in print. And then what we can see with the campaign profit ROI is that we are currently in the low category, 5.2. And there's a benefit to moving to the medium category, and again, another benefit to moving to the high category. So even just moving up to the medium category would give you significantly better returns. And then when we look at the optimised stuff, when we're looking at very low spends, we're suggesting up to 10% to be spent in print news brands. Then as we increase spend, we lose some of that. We're down to 7%. As we get higher, then print is still working well and others are hitting real diminishing returns, and so we're up to 8%. And then digital news brand usage, again by coding the individual campaigns and looking at the campaign ROI. What we can see here is that we are in the low category again at 2%. Digital display overall is 29%, so we've got a small share of total digital display. And there's a benefit to moving to the medium tertile, but no benefit to moving to that very high tertile of 5.4 to 25.9. So we're suggesting here would move to the medium tertile from our current level, which doesn't require that much shift. So the recommended medium investments, minimum investments here are 8% in print and 4% in digital. Okay, now onto a single sector. So if you're lucky enough to work, I'm not sure about that with supermarkets. If you're working in supermarkets and want to do some planning, then we have data. We have loads of different cases in supermarkets that we can look into to try to come up with very precise results. Because it's always better if you've got it to be able to look at a very constrained, this is my category. So the same charts again, and you can see here that supermarkets actually rallied in terms of their share of news brands in 2016, but then fell back a little. The decline here isn't nearly as marked as we saw on that grown-up stuff. It's still a sad decline. We can also see that the digital news brands is a very small amount here and isn't growing. So that's an interesting element to think about, that, okay, why has it gone down so much in 2017, particularly when that's been the year of kind of brand safety and such like. You would think the quality environment of digital newsbrands would be perfect for this. So back to our tertiles. This is the campaign profit ROI for supermarkets, where low is between 2 and 19, high is between 31 and 100, so that's a very big use of print news brands. Currently we are in the low tertile. It's becoming a recurring story, isn't it? But you can see the benefit here of moving to that medium tertile. Is absolutely huge, and the spend behind supermarkets is absolutely huge, so there's going to be an immediate kind of big profit benefit to your campaign. And then typically what you would be doing here is to take money away from other channels who are spending, have accelerated their spend, and this will be particularly about taking money away from digital display, but not digital news brands, as we'll just come on to. So this is the supermarket's recommended percentage spend in print news brands. This is quite a kind of interesting one, isn't it? At very low spends, we're kind of saying, don't think about print. We've got other things that you can do to try to get to people in supermarkets. It's not just how much do you spend, but everybody else is piling into this market too. As you go into medium amounts of spend, and we're saying really quite high, 20 plus percentages to go into print news brands. And then as we get to higher and higher elements, we're going down to 19, 18, 17. Onto the digital news brands, and we get the same result that we have seen before, that we are in the lowest tertile and there is a large benefit to moving to the medium tertile. Don't go too high here, it's saying, because that is a significantly worse position to be in. So for supermarkets, what we're saying, the recommended minimum investment should be 19.4% in print and 2.1% in digital. Finance. This might be the last one. I can sense a restlessness. We've seen this before. We know what you're going to say now. So it is a similar picture, but kind of nuanced. So we can see the big decline that there was from 2013 to 15, and then it's kind of, that decline has eased, hasn't it, as we go through this. Much more usage of digital news brands in this category. You can see it's really quite healthy and also increasing. So the campaign profit ROIs versus the print news brand usage. Again, we're in the low tertile at the moment, and we can see a very large benefit to increasing to medium. Even increasing to high would be much better than we currently are at in terms of the profit ROI of finance brands. And when we look at the print news brand percentages, then we can see that at a very low spend, we're talking about putting a lot of money into print, and then as we have a higher campaign spend, we're talking about print as a percentage going to be lower as the different shapes of the response curves tick in. That was savings and investments. Finance is split into two different categories because they're slightly different. So this is cards and loans. The pattern is kind of the same, but the percentage that you'll put into print is different. We're saying 12% for low spending campaigns, up to down, then declining down to 6% for high spending campaigns. The campaign profit ROI for the digital news brand is showing one of those pictures that isn't quite perfect, but again, I like it that we don't have completely perfect results. We have shown you that actually there's a benefit. If you're stuck in the medium element, there is actually a benefit to taking money out and putting less money into digital news brands, but there's more benefit in putting it into higher amounts of digital news brands. So there are obviously some brands who are using digital for other things than potentially the kind of brand building that we would be very good at doing, and that's reflecting in that low column. And it's one of those things that we want to go on and try to understand why that might be, and see if there's another piece of analysis that we need to do here. So here we are in that medium, we're just in that medium bucket, and so what we're recommending is the benefit to moving to that high bucket. So the recommended minimum investment in news brands is 11.9% for finance and 5.6% for digital, and we may be able to split that in our super categories and in our tool that we'll talk about on the website into the different cards and loans versus savings and investment, because they are quite different in terms of structure.